This is a Fatal 4 podcast.
Eyes forward, gamers, and prepare to shuffle those feet from side to side. It's time for Squared Circle Strafe, the premier video game podcast of the Fatal 4 podcasting network. I am your host, Pro Wrestling Noah, aka Noah Stewart, and it's time to talk about video games. Hello, folks. Hope you're having a good start to your week. Hope you had a good weekend, getting into things, getting into some business, some stuff, some relaxation. That's my favorite kind of weekend, is getting in some relaxation. As always, I went and saw a movie this past weekend, my favorite pastime, the Friday matinee. Usually do my double feature, but only got one in this week. I had to run some errands and such, but boy, did I make it count? ? I saw the Morbius level commercial flop this weekend that was Joker Folie à Deux, and folks, it's as bad as you've heard, if you can imagine. And me personally, I was not, super fond of the first one. I know people that are very, very big fans of it, and to each their own. I'm, happy you. It's okay to like a movie, but not my thing. And boy, was this movie. See, the problem with this movie, and people have been saying this, but it really feels like a movie that felt bad about the certain type of person that was really into the first Joker, that saw it as like a manifesto, perhaps. And Folie à Deux feels like a reaction to those people saying, hey, maybe don't do that. Not totally targeting people who just liked that first movie as a movie, but thought yeah, that had some good, cool things to say. Like, this movie was like, no, that's not what I was going for. And it's funny because it kind of alienates those people, and then also alienates people that, just wanted to watch a movie in where it wants to do a, big movie musical thing, but then is like really bad at that part too. So it just ends up not being good in a lot of ways. Fun little animated bit at the beginning though. That part was nice, but yeah, not probably, I don't know. We'll see. I am looking forward to the future of the DC movies with James Gunn heading up things. And this, might be the death knell of the previous way of DC movies. I also went to a baby shower this weekend on my wife's side, so I got to indulge in some fine Mexican cuisine, especially, around here. I'm in Texas, and we have access to some good quality Mexican style conchas, which, like in Texas, especially in Houston, you can, in most areas of the city, you can find a decent panaderia and get your hands on some good concha. I love a good concha. Nice and soft on the inside, nice and, I don't know, like the kind of cookie texture thing on the outside. Oh, love a concha. But yeah, that was, baby showers, man. Like, I feel like when you're in like baby showers, the most of the Fatal 4 pod is annoyed with like, I've been missing watching a decent amount of pay-per-views live recently because of baby related events, which they are getting annoyed by. But I feel like, that's just being in your 30s. I feel like when you're in your 20s, you're constantly going to weddings, and when you're in your 30s, you're constantly going to baby events as the people who got married are now having babies. that's just getting older. But that's enough about how my weekend went. Why don't we get into this past week in video games? Starting off this week, I think this actually happened fairly recently, but I thought it was kind of more of one of the more pressing news topics, which is this coming from Bloomberg via Video Games Chronicle. Tencent and the Guillemot family are reportedly considering taking Ubisoft private. The Assassin's Creed publisher has lost more than half its market value this year. Tencent and Ubisoft founders, the Guillemot family, are reportedly considering teaming up to take the company private after it lost more than half its market value this year. So what this means is that Tencent, the Chinese conglomerate, apparently owns 10% of Ubisoft and is speaking with the Guillemot family to advise them to explore ways to stabilize Ubisoft. One of the possibilities being taking the team and taking, Ubisoft as a whole and having it go private. What they're saying is a way to implement comprehensive cost reduction and optimize staffing levels to be more comparable with industry leaders. And really, like, what they're blaming a lot of this on, this need to take the company and go private, is one, the announcement that they delayed Assassin's Creed Shadows, which we talked about last week. And if you listened to Squared Circle Strafe Multiplayer, the Patreon episode we dropped last week, if you are subscribed to the $5 tier of our Patreon, Fatal 4 Plus, you heard us talk about some of that. But they're citing that, and also the disappointing launch performance of Star Wars Outlaws, which, according to them, they have a plan to work on that game and hopefully get more people to engage with it, and have like new purchases going into the holiday season. And with Assassin's Creed Shadows, they are working on tweaking it to make sure that it is just really in tip-top shape, because we've said it, I think, last week and on that other podcast, that they just really, really need Assassin's Creed Shadows to go well. Otherwise, things seem rather dire for Ubisoft right now. But there's people in this podcasting network that love Ubisoft and love their games. And there's, plenty of people out there that love. The thing I like about Ubisoft games is that they are usually a great go-to for podcast games, a game that you can just, mark things off on your little checklist as you're running around an open world and listen to podcasts. But something, and I heard someone else on a podcast talking about this, and I thought it was a good point, that one of the big problems with Ubisoft right now, as far as like a product that consumers spend money on, is that they generally have their games go on pretty deep discount. And a lot of them are kind of that like similar open world design. So you can see a Ubisoft game come out, and if you're not too concerned with like needing like day one spoilers or whatever, then you can pretty much just wait like a year, maybe two, and then pick up that game for like a fraction of the cost, which is true of like any publisher, sure. But with Ubisoft, I feel like a lot of, and we talked about this actually on Squared Circle Strafe, how frustrating the like overall story saga of the Assassin's Creed games can be. So it's like Ubisoft not really, like, from a game to game basis, not really known for having like super engaging stories really. So like they don't have the same need to play those games day one necessarily as other publishers do. I would maybe argue that out of all the Assassin's Creed games, I'm going to get roasted by a specific Fatal 4 member. I don't know why I keep saying that. It's Paul. I'm going to get roasted by Paul for saying this. Paul, I know you're listening. I think that Assassin's Creed Origins is my favorite Assassin's Creed story. I just really enjoy not even the future stuff. Like the future stuff, we talked about it on that episode. It's whatever. But the stuff with Bayek, I actually think Bayek's story in Origins is really cool, and like a really like cool personal tale of revenge that I really dug. And that's just an example of a Ubisoft story that I think is actually really, I could not actually probably name you another like Ubisoft narrative that I connected with as much than Assassin's Creed Origins. I mean, I'm currently experiencing the story of K-Vess in Star Wars Outlaws, which I have not finished. So maybe, I don't know, maybe by the time I'm done with that game, I will have another one that I connected with, but that remains to be seen, as does the fate of Ubisoft as Tencent takes them perhaps further into themselves, which I'm kind of glad that, I mean, I guess that Tencent has had this, biggest stake in them for a while, but I'm glad that Ubisoft, still mostly remains independent, and that they did not get embraced by another big company like Embracer, who we saw the how that worked out, where they ate or embraced a bunch of other developers, and then decided, we don't really want to this whole video games thing, maybe we don't want to invest in this as much, and then this shut down a bunch of studios, and just like a bunch of talent went away forever. So glad that didn't happen to Ubisoft. Hopefully Tencent will be able to help them stabilize a little bit, keep trucking along in this here video game industry. Our next story, it has to do with another thing we talked about for like the past couple weeks, it feels like. The continuing goings on with Palworld. Of course, 2 weeks ago, they were sued by Nintendo. Last week, they announced that they are coming to PS5 amongst said lawsuit. And again, amongst said lawsuit, it looks like the publisher Krafton has signed a licensing agreement with Pocket Pair to expand the Palworld IP to mobile. This is coming from Gematsu, and the Krafton makes PUBG, or owns the company that does PUBG, and the same studio, PUBG Studios, will develop a Palworld game that reimagines and adapts the core gameplay elements of Palworld for a mobile environment. Which I think I've touched that PUBG mobile game, and it's for what those are, for a battle royale shooter on phones, it's fine. I think it's a good one of those. I feel like the kids, and by that I mean, I guess, like Gen Alpha, are very well adapted to the phone touch controls for a shooter. I am not, but of the ones I've played, I feel like the PUBG ones are good. So I feel like this is a good choice to bring Palworld to mobile, but they say that it will reimagine and adapt the core gameplay elements of Palworld to a mobile environment. So obviously that means that it's going to be different. It might not be the whole game, and the way you interact with it will be different, like a suited to a mobile platform. But, Palworld sold a lot. Palworld performed really well. I was talking with a coworker today that just said that like they were looking for a game to play and they decided to get in the Palworld. I don't even like with previous conversations with this person, I don't think they were even necessarily a big survival game player. So I think they are adapting to the whole survival game thing, but it seems like they're getting a lot out of it. Like they're enjoying it, which me personally, I am not really a huge survival game player. I feel like the whole survival game craze really started in like the early 2010s. It was when I would say Minecraft really was like the kickoff to people getting into survival games in the big way. Not to say that Minecraft was the first one, obviously, but it was the one that like really made those style of mechanics mainstream. And I was like just starting college when Minecraft really started blowing up. So it did not really catch me in the same way. So I've just never really been a big survival game person. I think I spent 2 sessions with Palworld. I played like an hour and a half of it and kind of grasped like, okay, I kind of get what like the major mechanics of this are going to be. And then I sat down for a second play session, played about 20 minutes and went, what am I doing? I think especially because around that time, I want to say it came out in March. So I was like, I have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth to play. What am I doing? I'm going to put this down. I'm going to go play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And then I did that for like another 3 months. Which, you know, obviously, I think I've said on this podcast that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was also the thing that got me to quit my Fortnite addiction. So Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was taking my time from a lot of things around that time, which well-deserved. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a fantastic video game. Which some people might be saying when they get their hands on this here Palworld mobile version that is, I guess, currently in development and will be coming soon. Speaking of things that are coming soon, it is October, which means it's a good time for spooky games, and it appears that also BitBot Media and Metal X Entertainment also think so, because coming soon this month in October, they don't have a solid date, but it's coming in October. They have announced and are releasing a video game based on the Rocky Horror Picture Show titled The Rocky Horror Video Game. And this is the people who made this, brought you games like, the Garbage Pail Kids game and the Angry Video Game Nerd game. So, you know, some very simple 8-bit style side-scrolling action platformers, and this appears to be very similar to that. But hey, it's got, you know, the catchy, like they did a cover of the Time Warp in 8-bit music style. So really, I feel like people who like Rocky Horror Picture Show and I guess like video games as well, that's really all you're looking for, right? Like just the facsimile of playing a video game and also being reminded of Rocky Horror Picture Show stuff. Because I don't know, does Rocky Horror Picture Show really owe itself as a property, as a movie? Does anything about it resemble video game mechanics? I would say it's a stretch, but I don't know. It looks campy. It looks fun in that, you know, like not super serious, which the original Rocky Horror Picture Show movie is all those things. I'm sure it'll be a fun novelty. I'm not expecting anything huge from this. That's coming soon. If you are a big Rocky Horror Picture Show fan, that'll be there available for you this month. Something that's not going to be available this month or this year, in fact, is The Alters, because it is getting delayed into 2025, I believe Q1 of 2025. The Alters, which comes from 11-Bit Studios, the people that brought you This War of Mine and Frostpunk, are making this game, The Alters, which I believe had a demo during the Steam Next Fest. There's been a build of this game that has been publicly available for people to, you know, check out. They describe it as an emotional sci-fi game featuring plenty of cloning action. It's the narrative is this guy who's in space and he's stranded on a planet, but he has access to temporal technology, so he is able to pull different versions of himself from divergent timelines on this ship to help him kind of like put it back together so he can escape the planet. And it's like this big, like rotating kind of wheel of a structure that has a bunch of different rooms. And these different temporal versions of himself are like, oh, like here's a version of him that, decided to go to like biology school instead of engineering school. Or here's a version of him that didn't, like marry his wife or whatever. Or like this version of him became a fireman. And there's just like all these different versions of this guy, but I think they go into it having like very heavy narrative implications as well for all these different versions of this guy. From what I've heard from people who have played this game, it seems very promising. People have really enjoyed what they have played of this game so far. I never got around to playing that demo, unfortunately, but people seem pretty into this. It seems pretty unique and people are excited for it. And it is unfortunately getting pushed out of this year, which honestly I think is a good thing for this game in particular, because I think it was supposed to come out either November or December. And that is, I feel like, a hard window for kind of, lesser known games like this, not like a big franchise game, but like a first installment in a franchise, or, just a original game like this. It's hard for games like that to get a lot of attention at the end of the year because there are so many other big franchise games that people are paying attention to give their money to. And also, if the game ends up being a critical success, it doesn't get a ton of attention come awards time, because awards time tends to happen in like early December, and a lot of the decisions for those awards tend to happen in November. So those games tend to get overlooked, because if they get pushed into that next year window that happens at the end of the current year, a lot of people tend to forget about those games. I mean, just look at Marvel's Midnight Suns, which I think a lot of people tended to like that game, but a lot of people forgot about it because it came out in December. So by the time, it came time to talk about games of 2023, there just wasn't a lot of people talking about it. So I think The Alters getting pushed into Q1 of 2025 is a good thing, because that's becoming a really great window for games in general. Especially like, I feel like the end of January and beginning of, or like all throughout February, we've been seeing a lot of really cool stuff come out. I mean, like this past year, we had Persona 3 Reload, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, just a lot of like, and those are all like really big, chunky, quality JRPGs, but just a lot of good quality stuff coming out around that time. And I think and that's also a time that people are looking for like, okay, how's this year in games shaping out to look like? And I feel like if the Alters can really carve out itself a really nice place in the calendar that way, to really make a statement for like, okay, this is what, like, everyone, please remember us. I know we're at the beginning of the year, but like, you will be thinking of us when thinking about, like kind of how this year is starting to shape out. So I think ultimately this will be a good thing. So be on the lookout for The Alters come early 2025. Next up, kind of also like a little Ubisoft adjacent here. Former Mario and Rabbids lead and Red Dead Redemption lead designer form new studio. David Soliani and Christian Cantamesa have launched Day for Night Studios and are working on a new IP. The logo for this Day for Night Studios is a cute little raccoon wearing goggles. That's fun. But yeah, so David Soliani, I believe I'm pronouncing that name right. People get in the comments, tell me, or the Discord, tell me if I'm, need to adjust that. But he was the former director of the Mario and Rabbids games. The first one being a huge success for Ubisoft. It was kind of one of those early titles for the Switch, that kind of XCOM, Enemy Unknown style, grid-based strategy game. But instead of being soldiers shooting aliens, they gave Mario a gun and also had him hang out with the Rabbids, what are from the Rayman series and are basically minions. They were proto minions. The Rabbids were first, dang it. And the minions, I love them. As we all do, I'm sure. But the Rabbids were here first, and they're basically the same shtick. Very French too, but anyways, Mario and Rabbids, that first game, I played it, I liked it. But then they had the sequel, Spark of Hope, which I think I looked up statistics. That first game sold like 10 million copies, and the second one, Spark of Hope, sold about 3 million, which is not anything to sneeze at, but considerably less than that first one. I think Ubisoft had said that they were disappointed by the sales numbers of that one. So I think it was around that time that David Ciliani left Ubisoft and has been working on, assumingly, forming this new developer, Day 4 Night. And they have a new IP coming up. To which, and this is coming from VGC, and this is a quote from him. What we are crafting at Day 4 Night is a reflection of everything I've ever wanted to experience as a player. Joy, adventure, poetry, action, wonder, and the pleasure of working with friends. It's a lullaby for my soul and the serenade to our industry, to the magic and the madness of creating worlds from nothing. It's a story about triumphs, challenges, dreams to light the path we walk together. I feel like that's a lot of like very flowery language, but I feel like like one of the biggest moments publicly for him was when they announced Mario plus Rabbids and they gave Shigeru Miyamoto a gun on stage at that Ubisoft press conference, and he got to like get up and be like, hey, I'm the director of this game, and he had like a very like tearful moment of just like, oh my god, like I got to create a video game and Shigeru Miyamoto's on stage like talking about my game, like, which, you know, if I did grow up loving video games and I got to create a game that Shigeru Miyamoto got to talk about on a stage, that would also be a very emotional moment. So I understand why he was so emotional in that moment. But yeah, he seems like a genuine, very emotional kind of guy. So he has this very emotional language here, describing what he has planned for this, new venture in game development. It's nice seeing that he is moving on to something else and doing like an original IP. Something it'll be interesting to see what he does outside of the Nintendo plus Ubisoft ecosystems. So best wishes to Day 4 Night Studios and looking forward to what they got cooking up. Speaking of Mario, some recent interviews with Keegan-Michael Key have come out, and he is saying that for the sequel to the Super Mario Brothers movie, Super Mario Brothers Movie 2, whatever it's going to be called, he is teasing that it is going to be in a more intriguing setting and have deep cut characters. The sequel will be a little broader in scope. Broader in scope is what he's saying. I don't know. I feel like the Super Mario Brothers movie was met with, monetarily, just so much love. Love, I don't know if love's the right word, but a lot of people spent money to go see that Super Mario Brothers movie. And I've talked to people who really enjoyed it. I had a good time at the theater. I pointed at the screen a lot and went, hey, I recognize that thing. Hey, it's Donkey Kong. Hey, it's the Rainbow Road. Hey, that's a blue shell. Just a lot of that going on while watching the Super Mario Brothers movie, which was fun. I will admit that I got slightly, I could feel a tear welling up as Mario came up out of the clouds and saw the Rainbow Road on the Mario Kart. That was, and then you hear the Rainbow Road music, and it's like, oh, nostalgia. A thing that I have experienced a lot playing video games, and yeah, here it is represented on a movie screen in my local theater. How neat. The Mario movie, like, as a whole, I feel like when I left the theater, I was like, that was fun. I don't really have a lot to think about otherwise. Like, there's barely a story in that movie. It's about as involved as like a video game for Mario would be. And judging by Keegan-Michael Key's comments here, it feels like it's going to be a lot more. They're just going to be like digging through the catalog of Mario and probably like the wider Nintendo stuff that they have access to. And it will just be a lot more, pointing at the screen going, oh, hey, that thing I recognize. Which, not every movie has to be super thought-provoking. People really liked, and I say people because I would not. Deadpool and Wolverine was fun in the theater, but boy, it is not going to be in my top 10. I will say that. There's a podcast in the Fatal 4 podcast feed where you can hear my and the rest of Fatal 4's opinions on Deadpool and Wolverine. But I bring it up because it is similarly a movie where you point at the screen and go, hey, look, it's that thing. So I don't know if I personally am going to get a ton out of this Super Mario Brothers sequel, seemingly so, given these comments. Seems very indicative of what it could be, especially given the end of that first Super Mario Brothers movie. If you remember, spoilers, I guess, for like the post credits of the Super Mario Brothers movie, like the Mario and Luigi go back to New York, but they brought the Yoshi egg with them, and it's in the sewer, and the Yoshi egg is hatching, so we will probably see Yoshi at the very least. But I'm wondering what other Nintendo stuff we could possibly see, because I feel like when you think of, like, if they were wanting to expand this thing into a Marvel style larger Nintendo universe, what would be the first things you think of? Like, I mean, I don't know if they would do Zelda, because they have that live action Zelda series already planned for, I believe, Netflix. So I don't know if they want to conflate, animated Zelda and live action Zelda. The other things that immediately come to my mind, at least, especially for, some sort of genre differentiation, kind of get, more variety in types of movies. You could go like sci-fi with Metroid, or, an exciting racing movie, racing and sports with F-Zero. But I don't know. Tell me in the Discord, what if they were to do the next Nintendo movie that is not Super Mario Brothers, what would you want that to be? I think and what could they do with it as well? That I find that interesting. So get in the comments. Speaking of nostalgia, PlayStation has put conditions on the 30th anniversary PS5 Pro pre-orders in Japan. Now, if you remember, the PlayStation 30th anniversary collection is the gray, the classic PlayStation 1 colored gray PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 5 Pro consoles, and the controllers and the portal. And the pre-orders went live last week, I believe, for like the UK store. It was chaos from what I saw. It was just a lot of people trying to get in virtual lines and having the site crash, and then eventually having to like draw a lottery to see if you could even have the right to wait in the virtual queue for a chance to buy, a very expensive console. Some people are even, putting listings up on eBay for a console that they do not even own yet for like $10,000. It seems like a mess, but at least it seems like in the Japan store, they are trying to mitigate some of that madness by having a requirement be that people who are trying to sign up to buy the 30th anniversary PlayStations have to have at least 30 hours signed in to a powered up PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5 console between 2014 and 2024. So at least sometime in the past 10 years, you had to have had a PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5 powered up for at least 30 hours. Like, you see it and you're like, oh, like, that's Sony being weird and gatekeepy. But also, like, for how aggressive scalpers can be, I think it's actually like a pretty smart way to handle that. Because people who, are just looking for, whatever's going to be like big collector's items that they can just, swoop in and snipe people who actually want to buy them and are instead, being like the guy with the UK store who are putting up eBay listings for, probably thousands of dollars way past what it's actually worth. It makes sure that people who have actually spent a decent amount of time in the ecosystem get first dibs on these things, which is good. It's a smart way of handling that business. I don't know why they didn't have like this, decision across all of their stores, but apparently that's what the Japanese stores are doing. I don't know if they're going to have like another chance for American stores, but we'll see. And then speaking of, Sony adjacent IP, speaking of P's, Yoshi P questions whether it's possible to remake Final Fantasy IX as a single title. And again, something we talked about on that Squared Circle Strafe multiplayer episode as far as Final Fantasy remakes. Final Fantasy VII remake, this whole saga of games, this trilogy, I believe it's not going to be any more than a trilogy. That I feel like makes sense because Final Fantasy VII is a game that goes a lot of places, as most Final Fantasy games are. But Final Fantasy VII is a game that has so much cachet and such a huge fan base and people who remember it fondly that I feel like, and also, the Tetsuya Nomura of it all, that I feel like it really makes a lot of sense for that game to get blown out in, a spanning 3 whole games kind of way. And Yoshi P here, the guy who is the director of Final Fantasy XIV, people who play Final Fantasy XIV love talking about how cool and good for that game Yoshi P is. And this is a quote I'm seeing from a Video Games Chronicle article. He's saying that, I don't know, there are requests for Final Fantasy IX to be made, but when you think about Final Fantasy IX, it's a game with huge volume. When you think about all that volume, I wonder if it's possible to remake that as a single title. It's a difficult one. It is a tough question. This is something that I believe we've been seeing rumors of for a while, this supposed Final Fantasy IX remake. And Final Fantasy IX is a game that people love. I feel like people love all of those PlayStation 1 Final Fantasies, 7, 8, and 9. And 9 was like the one that was a return to form for the franchise, back to more fantasy style roots instead of the like more sci-fi edge that 7 and 8 had. And 9 has like a big fan base, and it was out of a GeForce Now database leak, this Video Games Chronicle article says, where the Final Fantasy IX remake and Kingdom Hearts 4 and Final Fantasy VII remake, Chrono Cross remaster, all those things were kind of lumped together in this big leak as far as like what Square Enix is working on. So like the possibilities of Final Fantasy IX remake happening is, pretty likely, but I just don't know if Final Fantasy IX has the same. I don't know if Square Enix were to come out and say that it's going to be a trilogy or even like a duology, like there's going to be 2 games in this, big upscaled remake of Final Fantasy IX, I don't know if people would be nearly as excited as Final Fantasy VII. I just don't know if it's got that same juice. I just don't know if people would show up for the Final Fantasy IX remake in the same way that people are showing up for the Final Fantasy VII remake. But apparently Yoshi P thinks that it has to be, it cannot be contained by a single title, which I feel like even with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Square Enix has had a tendency, a trend of when their games come out and they, sell ridiculously well, but then they go, yeah, but it didn't sell like as ridiculously well as we wanted it to. And it's like, but it made so much money. Like, what are these crazy projections that would have made you happy, Square Enix? I don't know. And so I feel like with that in mind, I don't know if there's any world where Final Fantasy IX remake number of games that contain this remake saga that Yoshi P at least is proposing. I don't know if there's any world where the sales of that game reflect what Square Enix would want sales wise out of that title. This is all still just speculation, so it remains to be seen. But that is pretty much all the video game news from this past week. Why don't we take a quick break, and when we come back, I will tell you about some of the games I've been playing.
Didn't get all of it and want more of it? Check out the debut episode of Didn't Get All of It and Then Some, exclusively on Patreon. We're talking about Mr. McMahon, the Netflix docuseries.
That's right. We chat through all 6 episodes and answer the questions that everyone is asking, like, is Vince McMahon good, actually? And does Hulk Hogan know wrestling isn't a shoot?
Join me, Pro Wrestling Noah, Cody, Paul, and Didn't Get All of It Japan's Kaz Wheeler as we dissect Vince and Mr. McMahon as described in the docuseries everyone is tweeting about.
So head over to the Patreon at patreon.com/fatal4pod or fatal4pod.com. Click Patreon at the top of the nav. And if you haven't signed up yet, now's the time because bonus shows are coming at you fast and furious this month. For only $5 a month, you can support the show, for one. Get exclusive access to the Discord, which is awesome, and bonus shows every single month. So again, sign up today, patreon.com/fatal4pod, or just go to our website. That's all you need to know. See you there.
All right, we're back. I didn't play a huge variety of games this week, let's say, but I put in some time, I put in some work, and damn it, I finished some video games. And one of the games that I finished is something that I said that I would last week, and that is Resident Evil Revelations. Played that on my PC through Steam and some on my Steam Deck in bed, which was nice. It's good. I enjoyed my time with Resident Evil Revelations. Not my favorite Resident Evil. There's just like parts of it that I feel like felt a little cheap, and that's probably because it was, it's a PC port of a 3DS game. But at the same time, it's a good, like, Resident Evil 4 styled Resident Evil game. And I think if I were to rank, do my ranking of Resident Evils, I would probably put it over something like 5. 5 is fun, but it's like one of the most action focused Resident Evils. There's not a lot of moments of like pure, spooky atmosphere in Resident Evil 5. The best part of Resident Evil 5 is definitely the part where you, like, if you have a friend and you can play with a friend, that's definitely the best way to play Resident Evil 5. That's the way I played Resident Evil 5. Because otherwise, there's like parts of that game that can be pretty frustrating as well. But it does have the part where Chris Redfield punches a boulder into pieces with his bare fist, so that part is neat. But speaking of Chris Redfield, he's in Resident Evil Revelations. You spend most of your time playing as Jill Valentine on the spooky ship which I think are my favorite parts of the game, is where it remembers to, embrace the, kind of tense, spooky atmosphere of those original Resident Evil games. Especially there's the section where there's like this, mutated monster version of there's this girl, Rachel, who is apparently like an agent from the BSAA that came to the ship before you. And she's like talking like, there you are. And she's like stalking you for a whole level. That's a really cool, neat part of the game. But because it's episodic, it splits the game into sections where you're playing as different characters. There's the main part. I would say the main part, because you start there and you spend like most of your time playing as Jill and her partner Parker. There are these two other BSAA operatives that are like more action focused. They give you a lot of ammo with those guys, and you're like blasting away, mutant wolves and the hunters, which are like the big alligator men in the Resident Evil lore. Then there's also sections where we're playing as Chris, and spoilers for Resident Evil Revelations, game over, a decade old. There's the part towards the end of the game where Parker gets subbed out for Chris, and you get to play as Jill and Chris together, which is fun. There are parts of the games that even like when you're controlling Jill and Chris, where it gets into like this era of Resident Evil was really into big bombastic action, and there's like a giant, huge tentacled boss fight that you have against this like thing that's even bigger than the ship that you're on, that you have to fight as Jill. And, like, those sections are like fun and good, but I even as someone who likes Resident Evil, I would say Resident Evil 4 is my favorite Resident Evil. I like the kind of more like toned down spooky parts of, because I feel like that's the thing that Resident Evil 4 really balanced the best. It has really great, awesome, atmospheric, spooky parts, but then also the action in Resident Evil 4 is never as crazy, over the top, bombastic as stuff in Resident Evil 5 got. It still felt you could still feel the tension in a lot of Resident Evil 4's combat. That's my favorite part of Resident Evil 4, is the ways that the encounters in Resident Evil 4 make you feel like enemies can come from any angle at any point, and you're constantly juggling your resources. So you're like constantly worried, like I'm going to have to switch to this other weapon because this weapon's about to run out of ammo, but I know I need this, like the ammo left in this gun to handle this specific enemy, so I have to handle these other enemies in this way, and it's so good. And this game has some of that. There's definitely parts of Resident Evil Revelations that I felt like I was really struggling with ammo. I think the last time I talked about the game on the podcast, there specifically it was that Rachel section where I just felt like I was just barely scraping by with the resources that I had. Just like came out of that encounter with maybe 4 bullets left in my handgun. And there was like maybe 2 other sections in the game where I felt that way, which is like kind of where I want Resident Evil to be. So I would say like in the overall ranking of Resident Evils, I would put this about in the middle of the pack. Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 8, I would say, are like the heights of the franchise for me. I'm a fake ass gamer boy. I still have never played the original Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 2 Remake. I really need to push Resident Evil 2 Remake up on my priorities list. Maybe I'll make room for that in this year's spooky games rotation. Oh yeah, and also the final boss of Resident Evil Revelations, I actually thought was really neat. Different phases of that boss fight. It's this kind of big. It's like a humanoid guy, but he's got a big sword arm. He's got various weak points on him. And he's like teleporting around, and there'll be clones of him, and you have to hit the right one. Pretty neat little boss fight for the final encounter there. But overall, Resident Evil Revelations, I'd give a thumbs up. I enjoyed it. And then speaking of games that didn't come out this year, this one's like a couple years old, I think. Grapple Dog. I think I talked about playing this on the podcast before, but I put the time into it to finish it also this past week. And Grapple Dog is a game that I was like not too hot on. I felt like it was just like, it's a fun 2D character platformer. You're a little dog, you got a grappling hook, and it's got, like momentum based grappling hook stuff. It's not like a zippy grappling hook. You really have to like, jump and then grapple and then use the momentum to get across gaps. And it's a game that I wasn't like, like I was just saying, not super hot on at first. But I feel like I got used to the grappling mechanics, and then as the challenge ramps up in that game, I feel like I started really clicking with it a lot more. I ended up really liking it by the late game. And it's especially, there's a boss fight. I think it's the second to last of the normal bosses, where it has a boss fight that I feel like is very reminiscent of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, where you are fighting an airborne boss, and you have a little animal friend that flies a plane like one Miles Tails Prower. Miles Tails Prower. And that I very much enjoyed that little callback. Just like, I would say fans of Sonic the Hedgehog in general should, if you don't know about Grapple Dog, you should maybe seek out Grapple Dog. It's got a very similar kind of momentum-based approach to its 2D platforming. The music's really good. The level, like the aesthetics of the game slightly remind me of that, Genesis era of Sonic. Definitely, if you're a fan of 2D platformers in general, definitely check out Grapple Dog. And also the final level, like when the challenge of the game really started ramping up, I felt like it was demanding, but in such a way that I would say it's like the final challenge levels of Astrobot, where every time you do the level and you die, you kind of recognize like, okay, I know what I need to do, and you get back in there and you get a little bit further, die, get a little bit further again until you are able to clear it. And I felt it was a nice chunky level of challenge that was really clicking with me. Yeah, I really liked it. And also I found myself wanting to play it because the sequel to the game just came out, I believe, a month ago. Cosmic Companions, I believe, is the subtitle to that one. But I want to, I put that on my wish list. I think I'm going to get it to, some other spooky games. 'Tis the season. Probably going to be wanting to check out that sequel pretty soon here. Those are the games I've been playing. But also, before I forget, I also, in the video games I've been playing, I've also been reading a video game book that I wanted to talk about. I've been really into reading, I listen to so many video game podcasts. I really enjoy spending a lot of time thinking about video games. So I've been reading a lot of video game related literature lately, what with Jason Schreier's books like Blood, Sweat, and Pixels and Press Reset. I'm really looking forward to his new book, Play Nice, that I think is about to come out, just came out. Since it's October, and this is actually something that we've had on pre-order for a while, but it's a big coffee table book sized book that's a collaboration with Lost in Cult and Fangamer. It's called The Horror Volume 1. This volume is Mansion. And it's a big book of essays written by people about horror games. And this volume, given the title Mansion, is all about games where you are, in a home, in a big structure, and it's got like really lots of really cool art in it, original and assets, like screenshots from the games it's talking about. And then, just like really cool essays of people, talking about how much they love those games, what those games mean to them, kind of what they mean in the grander scope of, horror games as a whole. if you can, hear flipping in the background, that's me. I'm flipping. I'm holding the book, flipping through the pages as we speak. And I read like the first like 3, chapters of this, I guess, the first 3 essays. They got, the ones I read was about the NES game Sweet Home, which is kind of the game that Capcom put out that would then go on to be the inspiration for Resident Evil. There's an essay about Luigi's Mansion. I just got done reading the essay covering Alone in the Dark, the original first Alone in the Dark. And it's a lot of really good stuff. Definitely something that I'm enjoying, in the Halloween season, reading some stuff about some, video games, what take place in some spooky mansions. Definitely, I think there are still some copies left on, I believe they're being sold on Fangamer. But Lost and Cult is a great website that sells cool video game literature. I think they have like their Lock-On series of like fan magazines, which are also like a collection of essays written about video games. The one I'm really looking forward to, I actually have another pre-order for a big book like this, is YouTube essayist Jacob Geller is putting out a book with Lost and Cult, How a Game Lives, which is a collection of like his YouTube essays put down into writing, with some extra like bits of writing from people in the industry, like other essayists and such, that he is invited to, add content to the book. Yeah, Lost and Cult, they do great stuff. And this is this is the first volume of this horror series. Mansion is just the first one. So they haven't said what the next ones are going to be, because these are all like community fan sourced, like, kind of like Kickstarter style. People invest into, the next books being made. Got to really, really rely on those pre-orders in order to get the thing made. But I will be getting all of these. I am loving this first collection of essays. Yeah, but that's all the stuff I've been playing and reading. Let's take another break, and when we come back, I will have another little section here for you. Hey, folks. You enjoy the Fatal 4 talking about some real nerdy stuff? You enjoy me, Pro Wrestling Noah, talking about video games? Well, what if I could talk with Fatal 4 members talking about video games? Me and Paul Griffin just did that on the inaugural episode of Squared Circle Strafe multiplayer that you can get access to through our new Patreon tier, Fatal 4 Plus.
That's right. We talked a ton about Star Wars Outlaws, actually. And why does everybody hate Ubisoft?
And how much we love Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and various mini games, and especially stuff like Queen's Blood and Paul's beloved Kessel Sabak in Star Wars.
I would win a Millennium Falcon if I was playing this in real life.
Yeah, watch out, Lando Calrissian. Hear all of that whole conversation, which I think was a lot of fun that we just had, if you support us on Patreon. And you also get access to that stuff, various other Fatal 4 podcasts, like the Vince McMahon docu-series episode that we're about to do, potentially episodes, and access to our Discord.
So just sign up at the Patreon, patreon.com/Fatal4Pod, and sign up for the Fatal 4 Plus tier. It's $5 a month. You get all that, plus the bonus shows, and then some. And we got a ton on the way, so come join us.
And welcome back. It's time for the third segment of the show. It's time for the Strafe Shuffle. And since it's October, I thought that I'm going to try and do something spooky to talk about every week this week. And this week I thought, last week I was telling you about all the spooky games that I wanted to play this year for the spooky season. So I thought I would tell you about all of the horror, spooky based games that I have played so far this year. And starting off this list of games is some stuff that actually came out last year that I got around to playing early in the year before a lot of stuff started coming out. One of those things being the Dead Space remake that came out in 2013 or 2023, which I had a great time with. Dead Space is one of my absolute favorite, not just horror franchises, but like game franchises in general. I love, I said earlier that Resident Evil 4 is probably my favorite Resident Evil game, and I feel like that has a lot to do with how much I love Dead Space, because Dead Space is pretty much just like, hey, we really liked Resident Evil 4. What if we took the same controls from Resident Evil 4 and did Alien with it instead? But yeah, Dead Space is a franchise I love. It was really nice, returning to the Ishimura, going back to the haunted house in space. I got to play this after having played the Resident Evil 4 remake last year, which I love both Resident Evil 4 and the Resident Evil 4 remake for different reasons. Resident Evil 4 remake is very different in parts, and like the same in parts, but like there's stuff that is radically different about Resident Evil 4 that is fun and surprising. And Dead Space remake kind of does the opposite, where it's like a very close, like in terms of structure to that first game. It's just kind of like a pretty straight 1-to-1 remake of the original, but they made it a lot prettier. But there's little things that it does, like having Isaac be voiced in the same way that he was in Dead Space 2 and 3, because if you remember, he was a silent protagonist in Dead Space 1, the original Dead Space 1. And they kind of get around that by having him speak voice lines that other characters would speak to kind of like fill in, those gaps in the script, which is a pretty neat way of doing that. And then I feel like they tuned the combat in a way that you are just really fighting for resources in the remake. I feel like they tuned the difficulty up a little bit, but not so much that newcomers would have, a big hard time getting to it. Because I feel like one of the things about the original Dead Space was that the plasma cutter, the kind of main, your first main weapon in that game, is so good that you would just end up putting a lot, like most of your resources, into upgrading the plasma cutter and mostly just using the plasma cutter. And they tuned the way that you receive ammo in the game so that you are constantly getting ammo for like all the different guns you have in your arsenal. So you're not just constantly, getting ammo for the guns that you are missing ammo for. So you cannot just rely on one weapon. You have to keep like swapping through your arsenal to get the most, effect out of combat. So really, really enjoyed that Dead Space remake. I also played the 2023 game El Paso Elsewhere from Strange Scaffold, which it's not so much a scary horror game, but it is, it is spooky adjacent in that you play as a guy who goes to a motel in El Paso, Texas, to try and stop a ritual that is being performed by your ex-girlfriend, who is a vampire, who's trying to end the world, which is a very fun premise. And if you like Max Payne, it is very much like it's an indie studio that made a Max Payne style game, bullet time, diving in slow motion. But instead of shooting dudes, you're shooting like, mummies and ghouls and werewolves and stuff. And it's like a decently lengthy game. I think it clocks in at about like 8 hours or so. But the writing is just so good. And that's always been one of Strange Scaffold's big strengths, is how good the writing and the voice acting in their games are. And this is one of their absolute best in that regard. El Paso Elsewhere rules. I am sad that I did not get around to playing it in 2023, because it probably would have been on my top 10 list had I done that. But yeah, El Paso Elsewhere, no joke. And then games that came out this year, I'm pretty confident that my favorite horror game of this year will end up being Crow Country, which is a PlayStation 1 style influenced by like Resident Evil, like the original Resident Evil's game, where you play as a cop lady or like a detective lady who is investigating a abandoned amusement park where some creepy stuff is going down. There's, all sorts of monsters and really kind of almost like Silent Hill inspired, like goopy flesh monsters in this place. And similarly to those games, it really, the way that ammo and resources is dealt out to you is in such a way where you are not incentivized to shoot and kill every enemy that you come across. You really don't have enough resources to deal with that. So you have to kind of make decisions to, run around enemies and try to, bait them in hallways and, try to avoid direct combat with them if you can. But also, like, the game has consequences for that too, because if you leave enemies alive and then you come back to that section, maybe like 2 hours later in the game, they will be like upgraded, tougher versions of those enemies. So you really have to be strategic with enemies that you kill and ones that you choose to, keep alive. And the puzzles in the game are really good. They're, those kind of adventure game style, Resident Evil puzzles where you pick up the item, you slot the item into the pedestal type stuff, but they're not as obtuse as some of those, old PlayStation 1 style puzzles can sometimes be. They feel very logical. Like I did not really have to, pull up a walkthrough for most of the game to figure out some of the puzzles. I was just, kind of able to figure out a lot of the stuff through, text context clues and stuff like that. So, and I really like the story, the way it wraps up. The music is really great. Just, if you love old, like PS1 style survival horror games, Crow Country is where it's at. Crow Country is so good. I feel like has a good chance of being in my top 10 at the very end of the year. So we'll see with that, but definitely check out Crow Country if you haven't. Don't sleep on it. I feel like it's kind of flying under the radar. I also checked out, and I would say this is horror. There's definitely scary parts in it. Senua's Saga Hellblade 2, which is a very, very heavy narrative focused game that has some combat, some puzzle stuff, but it's mostly a game where you're walking forward. I know that's like a big, like the detraction that people have from it, but I enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the first Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. There was actually parts of that game that I found frustrating. Some of the puzzles I felt like were just a little too not complicated, but just a little too much of like looking around the environment, trying to line, parts of the screen up to make, stuff fire off and be able to move through the next part of the level. And this game has a little less of that. They like to kind of tone down some of the puzzle mechanics and that made the combat a little less demanding. And I found the story in this one to be about as effective as the one in Senua's Sacrifice, which is impressive given how kind of final, like it felt like Senua's Sacrifice had something it wanted to say and it said it really well. And I wasn't really sure where they were going to go with a sequel, but where they go, I felt like was definitely worth it in Senua's Saga. And as far as horror goes, there's a section in this game where you are crawling through these caves, and it's very much like if you have been or have seen footage of people spelunking, parts of it feel a lot like that, where you are like on your hands and knees crawling through these very small crevices. And there's no light in these caves aside from the torch that Senua is carrying through it. And there is a part where, and if you're not familiar with the, Senua's Hellblade games, It is a game where you play as like a Viking lady Senua. It's all, very like Norse mythology based, and Senua has psychosis, where she sees, she has like hallucinations. She hears voices in her head. The binaural audio of the voices in your head that you hear throughout the game is very cool. Very definitely play it with headphones. It's a crazy auditory experience. And there's in the caves section, there's a part where there are like little bodies of water that you have to cross in the game. But Senua is afraid of the dark and is hallucinating these corpses that are coming out of the shadowy black water that are like grabbing up at her as she's crossing the water. And I felt like those parts of the game were very effective, very scary visuals. Yeah, I feel like the criticism I saw of Senua's Saga, I felt like was pretty mixed. There was some like really negative reviews for it. I had a good time. It was definitely, I don't know if it's going to make my top 10, but I definitely am glad I played Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. Then I played, speaking of Strange Scaffold, the people that brought you El Paso Elsewhere, I played Life Eater, which is it's like a menu-based game where you play as a serial abductor that hears voices in his head, more voices in your head, of what you believe is a god that is telling you that you have to kidnap someone and kill them in a very specific way, or else the world is going to end. And it's a very thematically unpleasant game. Like, the mechanics of it is you have a big timeline that you're looking at, that you're clicking through, that represents a schedule of a person that you are stalking, and you have to like deduce information out of it to pick the correct time in order to abduct them. And then it goes into a kind of mini game where it shows you a chart of organs that you have to like look at, kind of a, what do you call it, like a flow chart basically of criteria that this person meets that determines what parts of the body that you're supposed to destroy before killing the heart and killing the person, so that it appeases, this god's voice in your head. And you do this to a person once every year, and I believe it covers like 10 years in game. So it's like 10 levels of doing these stalking activities. And I will admit, as a game, it's like not that fun. And, it doesn't sound that fun. But also it's like, I feel like mechanics wise, it just wasn't that engaging. I would, if I were to give this a score out of like, 1 out of, like 1 to 5, I would give it something like a 2, maybe. Definitely something that I appreciate thematically more than actually playing it, but an interesting experience nonetheless. I played a game called earlier this year called Indica, which I would say is not so much. I thought it was going to be more of a horror game when I played it. It's a kind of like weird Odyssey game, very narrative, but also has some puzzles in it as well, where you play as a nun who is being ostracized from her convent and is being sent on a quest to deliver a letter to another church. And along the way, this girl Indica is having this kind of like battle in her head with a voice in her head that she believes is the devil, and just having these like philosophical conversations about like the nature of religion. And like I feel like more than anything, it's less of a critique on Christianity and religion and more of a critique on like Catholicism, in the ways that like they balance sins and confessions and this kind of like system of points that you receive in religion in a way that determines whether or not you go to heaven or hell. It's very interesting, very heady, and especially towards the end of the game, it gets super bizarre. There is some wild, strange visuals in this game, but it is one of the cooler narrative games that I have played recently, and it is definitely worth checking out. That's Indica. Don't forget it. And then I at least like put my hands on the indie game Still Wakes the Deep, that comes from the people that brought you Amnesia: Machine for Pigs, which was like the sequel to Amnesia: The Dark Descent. I believe it's the Chinese Room is the developer of that game. And Still Wakes the Deep is a kind of Lovecraftian inspired horror game that takes place on an oil rigger in the 70s in like Scotland. And in that regard, I only played about, I want to say like the first third of the game. And it does a really good job of setting up atmosphere, like really putting you in that place in like a Scottish oil rig in the 70s. I don't know, just that type of horror game where you're like running around, you don't have any weapons, a monster's chasing you, you might have to do a puzzle every once in a while. Like those just don't do as much for me anymore. Like especially after I played Soma, which is like probably the best version of that genre of horror game. I just don't have a lot of patience for that style of game anymore, because I played Soma on easy mode where you really don't have to worry about getting hit by the monsters or whatever and killing you. So it's a game that I appreciate more than I actually ended up playing, obviously, because I didn't finish it. But it's a game that I would maybe want to like look up a let's play of instead of playing myself. You know what I mean? And then I guess like the last thing that I put hands on this year, which is kind of horror game. Again, The Strange Scaffold. They put out so many games. I don't know how an indie studio like that puts out so many games, but this is a relatively small one. I believe it takes less than an hour to beat, but it's their game Click Holding, which is a game where you are a dude that you accept an invitation to a motel room where there's a man in a mask and he's sitting in a chair and he hands you a clicker, like the little like clicking device that like when you're like you go into a store and there's like the guy clicking the little clicker with it, just has like numbers going up on it so you can keep track of how many people are coming in the store. It's one of those. He gives you one of those and he tells you to click it. And by the end of the game, you will have clicked this device by clicking the mouse, your physical mouse, 10,000 times. And this guy will tell you, it feels very sinister, like almost, he's just sitting in the chair in this motel room. He's telling you to click it. And he tells you to like do other stuff around the room. Like, okay, now click it in that corner. Okay, now go turn on the TV and click it more. Okay, now turn off the TV. I don't like that. Okay, now click it faster. Okay, now click it slower. Like I feel like as I'm describing this game, you probably understand the wordplay of the title Click Holding. It is not subtle in that regard. But I would say it's horror in the ways that it makes you feel very uncomfortable at certain points. It's a very fascinating game. Also one that makes me made me feel as I was clicking, I found a way to click really fast by like taking both my hands and doing like a rapid fire clicking motion, which worked. Like it received all the inputs, but halfway through the game, I was like, man, am I going to like do permanent damage to my mouse? Like, am I like really wearing out the, the switch on this mouse? And also then you start thinking like, well, how many clicks does like this mouse have on it in its lifetime? Like how severely am I cutting the lifetime of my mouse down by playing this game? And also like I found out just through like accidentally brushing it with my arm that you can also click with the space bar in this game if you want. But really interesting game, Click Holding. And it's only like $3 on Steam, so it's definitely worth, at least checking out. And then there was some other stuff from, earlier this year that I wanted to eventually get around to playing, like Pacific Drive, which is a run-based car driving game where you're driving through the exclusion zone, which is kind of a like Lovecraftian weird stuff happening in, you know, like a big foresty area. You have to get, you know, salvage auto parts to upgrade your car to get further into the exclusion zone. It looked pretty neat. There's also the indie survival horror game Hollow Body, where Crow Country looked like a PlayStation 1 inspired game. Hollow Body is more like a PlayStation 2 inspired survival horror game. I think that came out just a couple weeks ago. That looks really neat. And then, of course, I think I talked about it earlier, or not on this podcast, but, you know, previous weeks in this podcast, about the Silent Hill 2 remake and how I was not very excited about it given the developer Bloober Team and not really being a big fan of their previous games. But it appears the Silent Hill 2 remake, the embargo's up and the reviews are very positive. People seem to really be liking this remake. So I may eat my words in that regard and happily do that if, you know, I get a chance to get my hands on this thing and, you know, see where it goes. But hearing good things about the Silent Hill 2 remake, that's nice. That it's nice to be wrong sometimes. So probably want to be checking that out sometime here soon. But that's all the horror games I've been playing throughout this year. I'm really looking forward to the end of this year because, like, you know, I like making lists, and I'm really looking forward to the part of the year where I will be able to like list all of, you know, like my top 10s basically. I'm looking forward to kind of, you know, charting out the content I'm going to be doing for, you know, that time of the year. So looking forward to playing more video games, talking about more video games. That's what we do here, right? We love talking about video games. At least I do. I hope you like listening to me talking about video games. But that's going to be it for this week. So thank you for listening to Squared Circle Strafe. Leave us a nice review on Apple Podcasts if you like the show. You can follow me on twitter.com @UziNeon if you want to catch more of me talking about some real nerdy stuff. You can follow the Didn't Get All of It podcast to hear me and the rest of the Fatal 4 hosts talk about the latest and greatest in professional wrestling. You can also sign up for our Patreon to get exclusive access to our Discord as well as bonus content and the satisfaction of supporting independent podcasting media. Head to patreon.com/fatal4pod. That's fatal, FOUR pod. Thank you again for listening, and as always, enjoy your gaming.